in Oregon. Pacific Continental.
Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, Ian Williams of Independent Television News updates the East Timor story. Chris Patton of the European Union talks about East Timor-like operations in Europe and elsewhere. Terrence Smith looks at a new report on movie and television violence. Mark Shields and Paul Gigot analyze the political week. And Fred DeSam Lazaro reports on a form of political affirmative action in India. It all follows our summary of the news this Friday.
The biggest obstacle to feeding the world is not the food supply, it's just politics. Who is dedicated to opening the borders to get food to the people who need it?
This program is made possible in part by a grant from Travelers Insurance.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
Foreign troops cracked down on anti-independence militias today in East Timor. They arrested a senior leader and conducted house-to-house searches for other militiamen blamed for weeks of violence. In Geneva, the UN Human Rights Commission held an emergency session to consider a war crimes investigation in East Timor. We'll have more on East Timor right after this news summary. The Indonesian government suspended a new security law today. It had sparked 2 days of violent protests. Parliament passed the bill yesterday, giving the armed forces wide-ranging emergency powers. Thousands of university students rampaged in response. They said it threatened the country's move toward democracy. At least 4 people were killed, 115 injured. Back in this country, Republicans in Congress went right to work on a tax bill today. They did so despite President Clinton's veto of their nearly $800 billion tax cut yesterday. The House Ways and Means Committee approved a bill that renews $23 billion in tax credits. It was passed on a party line vote. A Treasury official said President Clinton would likely veto them as well, unless there's a deal to use federal surpluses on Social Security and Medicare. On Wall Street today, stocks were off slightly after yesterday's big drop. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed down 39 points at 10,279. The NASDAQ was down 9 points at 2740. The Dow declined 524 points this week. It's off 9% from its all-time high last month. An Oregon teenager pleaded guilty today to murdering his parents and 2 students in a 1998 high school shooting rampage. 17-year-old Kip Kinkle gave up an insanity defense and entered the plea in a Eugene, Oregon court. He was charged with 4 counts of murder, 26 counts of attempted murder. His trial had been set to begin next week. In Taiwan today, a miraculous rescue from the earthquake ruins. We have more from Catherine Bonner of Associated Press Television News.
Rescuers tried to shield the boy, who they'd wrapped in a blanket, from the huge media pack, which had gathered during the hours it took to pull him from the rubble. It was 87 hours after the massive earthquake struck Taiwan before 6-year-old Chang Ching-hung was freed. He'd been trapped with his parents and 2 sisters in the wreckage of this apartment building in Dalian, central Taiwan. When they found him, he asked for water and said, "Why am I here, and where are my parents?" The rescue teams used their bare hands to remove concrete and other debris, fearing that machinery might unleash a torrent of concrete and other rubble, further endangering the young survivor. The rescue team's leader explained how they'd got the boy out alive.
We have worked about 9 hours.
He said they had to dig for 3 meters before finding him.
North Korea announced today it will suspend long-range missile tests. It said it will do so as long as talks continue with the United States. Negotiations on security have been underway in Berlin. Last week, the U.S. said it would ease its long-time ban on trade and investment with North Korea. Russian jets fired rockets on the capital of Chechnya today. It was the second day of airstrikes. Witnesses said 5 people were killed, at least 21 injured. Thousands have fled. Apartment buildings and houses were among the targets hit. Russia said it was attempting to crush Muslim Chechen rebels who have twice invaded neighboring Dagestan. The attacks were first on Chechnya since the 1994-96 war. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to an East Timor update. Chris Patton of the European Union, movie and television violence, Shields and Gigot, and affirmative action in India. Our East Timor update is from Ian Williams of Independent Television News.
It started as an act of defiance towards this ship full of departing militia. But it soon became a party as pro-independence supporters overcame their fear and spilled onto the street beside Dili's port. It was the first outpouring of emotion since the violence which followed the vote on independence. Suddenly, though, columns of Indonesian soldiers appeared, heading for the port, pulling out of East Timor. There was a moment of tension and uncertainty. The crowd parted, and through them marched the men blamed for much of the destruction of recent days. But the soldiers seemed resigned. They managed to hide any anger or humiliation, and they prepared to board the ship to Jakarta. It's part of a big troop withdrawal which will remove the majority of Indonesian soldiers and police from East Timor. When the ship arrived an hour earlier, the mood had been very different. Australian troops were jeered at by soldiers and militiamen who'd arrived on the ship from other cities in East Timor. Australian helicopters buzzed overhead. It's not yet clear what damage these militias have done elsewhere in the territory, though the UN got its first inkling today when it sent a helicopter on a reconnaissance mission over towns in the western part of East Timor.
Large portions of the housing stock have been destroyed. There were fires still burning in Ayanaro. 2 houses were seen being on fire. In Maliana and Suai, up to 80% of the housing stock was actually destroyed. No vehicle traffic practically at all, very few people to be seen, and just basically scenes of pretty intense devastation.
Earlier, Australian peacekeepers had mounted a massive show of force in Dili. Hundreds of soldiers, backed by heavy armor and helicopters, had closed down the eastern part of the city, searching from house to house. They showed little respect for the Indonesian soldiers looking on. The peacekeepers are taking control, and this was designed to show it.
We have the entire area sealed off, and if people were to escape the immediate location, they will get caught on the extremities of the cordon.
3 suspected militia members were found. Dozens of others have already been arrested, including one of the leaders of Dili's most notorious militia. The peacekeepers will make their prize captors available to any UN inquiry into the atrocities. And today, they were talking tough.
I think the militia it sends to anybody is that you cannot run, you cannot hide, justice is here.
But they haven't yet stopped the burning, which continues in Dili. And the commander of the peacekeepers warned that it may be some time before he's in a position to mount such an operation elsewhere in the territory.
The troops are being deployed at a very rapid rate. However, this is not to say that this is overcoming the security problem in the wider part of the country. We always knew this was going to take weeks. We've been here matters of multiples of hours and days. That's all. This is going to be a protracted peacekeeping operation.
Today, troops from the Philippines arrived to join the peacekeepers. General Cosgrove still insists an 8,000-strong force will be enough, but it's a measure of the pressure he's under that he's urging contributing countries to speed up their deployment.
Now Europe's view of East Timor and other humanitarian disasters, and to Elizabeth Farnsworth.
The European Union, made up of 15 countries from Finland in the north to Greece in the south, is primarily an economic and trading bloc, but it is also trying to develop its own foreign and security policies and, in the wake of Kosovo, its own military capabilities. The EU's Commissioner for External Relations is Christopher Patten. He's a former member of the British Parliament and was Britain's last governor in Hong Kong. Thanks for being with us, Commissioner Patten.
Nice to be here.
Among those troops we just saw in East Timor on their way are member states of the European Union soldiers, British, Italian, French, and Portuguese soldiers. And European soldiers are in Kosovo, too. Why? Why are member states risking the lives of their soldiers in these places?
Well, there are two general reasons. First of all, where there is intolerable abuse of people's human rights, I think particularly when it's within our own or on the borders of our own community, it's right for us to want to intervene, and that's what our publics want. Secondly, where we can do that effectively, it's right for us to do it. Now, there are particular arguments involving East Timor. For years, the rest of the world, Europe, North America, has pressed the Indonesian government to give the people of East Timor the right of self-determination. We underpinned the UN mission when they were doing that, when it led, because they'd voted for independence, to appalling violence. I think there was a real moral importance for us in getting involved in East Timor, and that's what we've done.
Commissioner Patten, in your job you have the lead responsibility for human rights policy, do you not?
Yes, I do.
Does this mean that you will be helping to develop the policies for when and where to intervene?
Yes, it does. Sometimes I think it's fairly clear-cut, and I don't think anybody seriously believes that we were wrong to try to intervene and to intervene successfully in Kosovo, as we've intervened previously in the Balkans, which is, as it were, in our backyard. It's part of our moral community in Europe. Talking about intervening beyond that, well, it depends a certain amount on how effectively we can do it and what our historical obligations and commercial and social obligations, historical obligations, are to a place. And East Timor obviously has very strong connections with one of the member states of the European Union. But it's worth remembering that Europe is the biggest trading bloc in the world. It's the biggest single market. It runs the biggest development and humanitarian programs. And I think it's important that we have a voice in foreign affairs and are able to make that voice into something more than just rhetoric from time to time.
Is that why you want your own military capability for the European Union?
Well, we've had our own capability as part of NATO, and we don't want to do anything which isn't other than under the NATO umbrella. It's very important to get that clear, but we do think that Europe should be prepared to do more in the context of NATO to stand up for our own interests. And we also think that there are particular areas where Europe can make a contribution in conflict prevention, in peacekeeping operations, and so on. We've obviously got some difficult issues to resolve on this matter, because some of the members of the European Union aren't members of NATO, and there are some members of NATO, like Turkey, which aren't members of the European Union. So we've got to do this sensitively, taking account of individual countries' interests. But above all, the message is a clear one, that Europe has to be prepared to punch its weight. The United States has been pressing us rightly to do that for years, and now we've got the chance to show that we're listening to the message.
What kind of military capability are you talking about?
Well, one of the things that was, I think, pretty clear during the Balkans crisis was, despite the fact that we spend a lot of money on defending ourselves, we don't actually have the technological ability to sustain overseas operations for the length of time and with the effectiveness that the United States enjoys. So it raises serious questions about the way we spend money, about the amount we spend, and about how much value we get for our spending. I think there are serious questions which the new NATO Secretary General, George Robertson, was raising in a speech in Ottawa the other day, or in Canada.
And do you think Europeans are willing to pay for this? This will be expensive, right? Because haven't the European militaries as a whole been drawn down significantly since the Cold War?
Well, I think everybody's made some adjustment in their military spending since the end of the Cold War. It isn't necessarily always a matter of spending more. It's a matter of spending money effectively. George Robertson, who I referred to a moment or two ago, was saying recently that it had taken us a great deal of time and effort to get 2% of our forces into Kosovo, and it raised questions about how effectively we were using the other 98%, and that's a question which all of us have to address. But for Europe, it's not just a question of being able to deploy military capacity. It's also a question of effective development assistance, of helping with reconstruction, of helping, which will be a problem in East Timor as it is in Kosovo, in helping establish civil administration, because there isn't any in East Timor, just as there wasn't any in Kosovo.
Commissioner Patton, as you know, this week, President Clinton, and also Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the UN, addressed the question of when and where and why to intervene when there are mass humanitarian violations. You've touched on this a little bit. How are you going to make those decisions?
Well, I think the speeches of Kofi Annan and President Clinton opened up an extremely important and interesting debate, and there were some responses to that. The Chinese foreign minister, for example, seemed to imply that the nation state was absolutely sacrosanct and you should never do anything which involved interfering in somebody else's country, whatever that government was doing. Now, it's a neat reversal, because of course it used to be the Marxist notion that national governments didn't matter, that the revolutionary working class should dominate and run everything. Now what we're saying, what a lot of countries are saying, is look, there are issues which arouse the conscience of the world, and you can't limit what countries do according to one country's ability to veto things in the Security Council. You have to find some basis for operating, where you can be effective and where it is clearly justified by the scale of the atrocity being perpetrated. I spent some years as a development minister for my own country, and what was terribly frustrating was we became much more successful, much more professional at being able to deliver assistance to help people who were the victims of political failure. We were much less effective in preventing the political failure in the first place, and that's something we've got to address.
Do you think we're in the midst of a historic redefinition of state sovereignty?
Well, I think state sovereignty is being redefined by a lot of things. It's being redefined by information technology. One reason why people have been so concerned about what happened in East Timor, not just people in Australia, not far away, but people in Europe and people in North America, is they can see what happens on the television. And it's undoubtedly the case that, that communications today focus international anxiety far more on humanitarian issues. Now, we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful that we don't just behave in a given way internationally because one television crew has been on the spot. There are lots of places where humanitarian abuses are committed where there aren't any television crews on the spot. But nevertheless, I think we have to face the fact that there are consequences for the conduct of foreign policy, of globalization. Globalization which has had such spectacular economic effects, and globalization which has helped to shape and educate opinion in individual national countries.
And Commissioner Patton, how long will it take before the European Union has its own military capability of the sort that you're talking about now?
Well, what we're starting to do is to consider what needs to be done to enhance the capability which we already have under the umbrella of NATO. And I repeat, nothing is going to be done which in any way undermines NATO, because NATO has done a fantastic job and will continue to do a terrific job. So everything we're doing is under the NATO umbrella. But I think an area where we can be innovative and imaginative is in the area I mentioned earlier of conflict prevention, of managing crises, of developing peacekeeping in a more effective and flexible way. And I think I hope we'll be starting to do that fairly rapidly. It's what's called in the European jargon the Petersburg tasks. It's tasks we identified as one of the main focuses for our development of a common foreign and security policy. But the NATO link is absolutely sacrosanct, and it's very important that the spokesman for European foreign ministers, who will be starting work in a few weeks' time, is Javier Solana, who was, of course, the Secretary General of NATO.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks very much indeed.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, media violence, Shields and Gigot, and changes in India. New criticism of violence on television and in the movies. Media correspondent Terrence Smith has the story.
In the past year, the nation's airwaves have been filled with scenes of horrific violence. From Columbine High School, to offices in Atlanta, Georgia, to a church in Fort Worth, Texas, just last week. In the wake of these incidents, Americans have been questioning themselves about whether the violence on our streets has any relationship to the violence on our screens. Hollywood immediately found itself on the defensive. 2 violent episodes of ongoing television series were pulled, and a handful of others reworked. Now comes an ambitious news study out this week that asserts that the volume of violence on television and movie screens continues at very high levels.
Hollywood is selling and glamorizing violence, and it may, in the process, be making America's kids more violent.
Robert Lichter, president of the Center for Media and Public Affairs, billed the study as the most comprehensive look at a broad range of media to date. The study found that, on average, television and movie viewers encounter an act of serious violence once every 4 minutes. Serious violence being defined as murder, rape, kidnapping, and assault with a deadly weapon. The study also analyzes how violence is portrayed in the media.
It's remarkable the degree to which violence in entertainment is presented as a relatively harmless, necessary, and even laudable way of solving problems. We found that good guys commit violence almost as often as bad guys, both television and movies.
Among the top 10 most violent TV series cited by the study, CBS's long-running and highly rated Walker, Texas Ranger. HBO's Oz, an award-winning series about life behind bars. And the syndicated show Mortal Kombat, which was spawned by a controversial video game. Among the top 10 most violent movies, Warner Brothers' Lethal Weapon 4, The Mask of Zorro, and topping the list, the Oscar-winning Saving Private Ryan.
You don't want to get rid of the Private Ryans. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But that bathwater is getting pretty toxic at this point. If we don't get rid of some of it, it's going to start to harm the baby.
Shortly after the Columbine incident, Jack Valenti, head of the Motion Picture Association of America, urged the entertainment industry to use restraint and to excise any gratuitous violence. This week, his organization criticized the Lichter study, saying it fails to reflect the more recent self-policing actions of the industry. Attending the press conference in support of the study was Kansas Senator Sam Brownback.
This is something we need to examine and discuss, not legislate. I think it's very important that we do this in a atmosphere where we're saying to people, we're not here passing a number of laws or trying to censor anybody, but we are here to examine the totality of the impacts of where the American culture has gone.
Nonetheless, Senator Brownback has introduced legislation that would create a Senate task force to address what he called the country's cultural crisis. Joining us now for a discussion on violence in mass media are Robert Lichter, an author of the study, whom you saw on tape a few moments ago, E.J. Dionne, a Washington Post columnist and scholar of government at the Brookings Institution, and Rupert Wainwright, the director of Stigmata, which debuted as the #1 grossing film 2 weeks ago. He has also directed advertisements and award-winning music videos. Welcome to you all. Mr. Wainwright, let me ask you, the study essentially argues that the entertainment industry is filling its products with more and more gratuitous violence. Is it true?
I think that violence is inherently attractive, and I think that we live in a very violent society. And I think that there's been violence in entertainment from the Iliad, through the Bible, through Shakespeare. I don't think violence in entertainment is going away. And I think from my own point of view, I'm much more concerned with the access that people have to the tools of violence than I am about them seeing violence on the screen. I'm much, much more concerned about government protecting individuals by gun laws than I am protecting individuals from watching what goes on the screen.
Robert Lichter, what is the evidence that violence on the screen engenders violence in life?
Well, this is the sort of thing that is consensus now in the scientific community. Everybody from the Surgeon General to the American Academy of Pediatrics has concluded, after looking at all of the research, that violence in the media does contribute to violent behavior among kids, also makes people become desensitized to violence. In the case of some kids, scares kids. But I'm always struck when Hollywood people say, it's not us, it's the guns out there, and yet you look at the product, and what the product does is to glamorize good guys who use guns. So we may need gun control laws. Maybe Hollywood needs to control the way that it glamorizes the use of guns.
E.J. Dionne, I'm sorry, Rupert?
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question. Obviously, I'm very sensitive to the points that you make here, but the entertainment that Hollywood makes, and by the way, I'm not here to defend Hollywood, but the entertainment that Hollywood makes goes to all over the world. And if you look, for example, at the violence in Canada or England or Australia or New Zealand that see substantially the same programming, you see very radically different rates of violence, and especially lethal violence, than you do in the United States of America.
Well, so that actually touches on a point that E.J. Dionne raised in a column earlier this week, which is, you raised the question, is there a link between the gun culture in this country and the violence that we see on our entertainment?
Yes, I think the problem with the argument we've had since Columbine and through all these other dreadful events is that each side throws up the issue of either culture or guns as a shield against the part of the argument they don't like. If you want to defend violence on television, you say the problem lies entirely with guns. In the meantime, gun control opponents keep saying, no, 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 it's not guns, it's the culture. I think the fact is it's both, and they may be intertwined, and doing something more serious about gun control oughtn't to block you from asking Hollywood, asking film producers to be more socially responsible. When you look at what the entertainment industry has done toward attitudes about race, about gender, about gays and lesbians, they have tried to engender a more tolerant atmosphere in our country, and that's good. If they can do that about prejudice, surely they could think about the impact of what they put on our screens and televisions, especially on kids, and think about doing something about that. It's not censorship, it's corporate responsibility.
Is there any sentiment to do that, Mr. Wainwright, in Hollywood, though, in the community that you're familiar with?
Well, I'm very familiar with my own personal sense of responsibility in terms of what I want to show in films. I would say that a lot of people share that awareness, but at the same time, you have to remember Hollywood is not an organization. Hollywood is a town where there are a lot of competing corporate entities that are all trying to get a larger market share. And essentially what you've got is a capitalist system that is putting out entertainment, not even that it particularly cares for, but is just trying to get viewers. And I'm sad to say that time and time again, that the people who own those corporations make more money when they put out violent programming than they do when they put out family fare that everybody asks for the whole time, and yet very few people go and watch. So,
all right, yes, I think that's a point. Robert Lichter, let me ask you this. You mentioned in the study the effect of ratings, and there are ratings, of course, on television and in film. Are they effective? Do they work?
This is something that really struck me that we did not expect to find. We just matched up our 10 most violent TV shows and 10 most violent movies against the ratings and found that a majority of both had ratings that said these are fit for kids. A majority of the top 10 most violent movies were rated PG-13. Private Ryan was an R, but a kid can go see Rush Hour U.S. Marshals at PG-13. 7 out of the 10 most violent TV shows were rated TV-PG. So in theory, even if we say, look, this is a price we pay for a free society, for a capitalist society in which anything there's a market for goes, there's supposed to be a mechanism to help parents to protect their kids from this stuff. That's not working.
Go ahead.
No, but what I wanted to say to what Mr. Wainwright said earlier is, first of all, I agree with him on rates of lethal violence in America being worse because of our gun laws. So we're not arguing about gun control here. I think what people are asking of these capitalist institutions in Hollywood is that they exercise some corporate responsibility like others do. There was an appeal issued earlier this year, signed not only by conservatives like Bill Bennett or Senator Brownback, but by Jimmy Carter, Mario Cuomo, Gerald Ford, and they said, look, we don't want censorship. We do think we should go back to some standards in the movies. It ought to be possible to reduce the overall level of violence, especially the level of violence at times of day on television when kids are going to see it. And it ought to be possible to ask the industry not to market these films to people who aren't adults. I think one of our conflicts as a country is we respect the right of adults to see whatever they want. And yet people are also parents as well as being just simply adults, and they want to protect their kids. And what we're trying to do, and I don't think we've found it, is to find a reasonable balance that will protect the rights of artists, but also say we do have a problem in the country, and yes, part of it is a cultural problem.
Rupert Wainwright, you told us earlier today that voluntarily you changed a scene in the film Stigmata. Even after it had been approved, it had gotten its rating. Tell us about that and why you did it. Were you feeling some pressure to do that?
No pressure whatsoever, actually. Not from the ratings board, not from the studio, not from anybody. There's
or from the climate at large?
You know what? What I did feel was that I didn't want the movie to be focusing on the most violent moment in the movie and then the explicit showing of that. I didn't want people to focus entirely on that rather than the movie as a whole. It's not a very violent film as it happens, but there was one very violent incident in it. And I didn't want that to become the only important point in the movie. So I trimmed it down so that people could imagine it happening rather than see it more explicitly. And to be honest, it was a very cynical point of view. I didn't want people, attacking the film for a totally irrelevant aspect. Coming back to the point about how individual producers and directors and writers and actors feel in Hollywood, a lot of them are parents. I myself am a parent, and I think that if you ask them, are you interested in helping increase a higher sense of responsibility in the arts, every single one of them would say, yes, we absolutely are. I don't think there's any resistance in Hollywood towards an increased sense of responsibility in films and television. I think that there's the welcoming for that.
Well, there may be, but Robert Lichter, did you find any of that?
Well, if the welcome mat is out, I don't see anybody crossing over it. When we found that on all different genres, music videos, cable TV, broadcast TV, movies and theaters, you get similar rates of serious violence, say about 1 every 4 minutes, and a lot of that violence is in the top 10 in any category. It's clear violence has become a commodity, like widgets.
And so violence is popular.
Yeah, it's being sold as pure sensation. I think Mr. Wainwright is getting at something here. He excised a scene because he had a sense of narrative as well as moral responsibility. And gratuitous violence means you're selling the sensation instead of advancing a narrative.
You were trying to say?
I completely forgot what I was trying to say. But coming back to that, let me just ask something here. One of the points that you make when you're talking about me exercising responsibility about narrative and graphic, and Private Ryan is sort of good violence and other programs are not necessarily good violence. I personally completely agree with you about that. I'm working on a film now that the approach to violence is very similar to that of Saving Private Ryan. What I'm worried about is some kind of, some kind of group of big brothers who go, good violence, good violence, yes, right. Bad violence, no. Not because I'm worried about, not because I think that there isn't a distinction, but I'm just not sure that I want anybody telling me or other people what that is.
Especially anyone from the government, which, let me ask you, J.D.
Yeah, it smacks of Russian censorship.
I mean, is there a constructive role for government to play in this?
I think there is a narrow role in terms of giving parents some tools. I think the V-chip is a reasonable alternative to censorship. I agree with Mr. Wainwright. I don't want censorship. I don't want the government setting up people sitting there in Hollywood. I think V-chips and things like that where parents might have some real control over the television to make sure they might keep certain things away from kids are useful. But I think Mr. Wainwright, first of all, good for him for cutting that scene. But secondly, what he's showing is that, in fact, this movement to pressure Hollywood, it's not big brothers ramming them with a hammer. It's a lot of people in the country saying, look, you guys make all this entertainment, you guys make a lot of money, out of it, you ought to think twice about certain things you might put in the movie that may well be gratuitous and, in fact, not artistically very interesting or creative either. And I think he responded to that, and I think that suggests that there is change happening without the big brother of government setting up shop in Hollywood.
Well, isn't the bottom? Think twice, yes, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times about all aspects of violence. Personally, I'm very strongly agree that violence without the result of violence is basically pornography. I am shocked and horrified by it. But I really don't want to, I don't want to be the person who decides what pornography is and what's erotic literature, you know. So at the same time, I don't want to be the person, nor do I want anybody else telling me good violence, bad violence.
All right, just a few seconds left, Robert Lichter. Isn't the ultimate weapon of the consumer the box office? Too violent? Don't go see it.
No, as a civilized society, there have always been social prohibitions beyond which people don't go, and those prohibitions are being moved rapidly. But the other point is, it's not Big Brother. There's an industry board Jack Valenti sits on, made up of parents, but these ratings are not eliminating these violent shows from kids.
Okay. Thank you all very much. We're out of time. I appreciate it.
Now to Shields and Gigot, syndicated columnist Mark Shields, Wall Street Journal columnist Paul Gigot. Tax cuts. The president vetoed it yesterday. There's talk today, Mark, that there might still be some hope for a compromise, but it's over, isn't it?
It is over, Jim. There will be a tax bill to extend tax breaks that would expire this year, and there'll also be some small business tax.
But that came out of the House Ways and Means Committee today.
That's right.
But the White House said the president's going to veto that too.
Well, I think the problem is they haven't paid for it and they haven't figured out how to pay for it. If they do, I think they will. I think it's popular enough, and I think there will be some tax relief, quite frankly, on the minimum wage. I see a compromise between increasing the minimum wage and putting some small business, especially restaurant relief or tax breaks in that one.
So, Paul, all of this commotion, we've been talking about it here every Friday night for weeks now, and the end result is nothing.
No, I don't agree with that, Jim.
Okay.
The end result in terms of
policy.
Policy.
Okay.
The end result in policy for now is nothing. But it's setting things up for a debate over the size of government, a philosophical debate in the election of 2000 about whether you want to keep the surplus in Washington or whether you want to return some of it in tax cuts. It's a big debate. It ought to take place at an election.
And it's something that it's legitimate. It's a legitimate division between Democrats and Republicans. That's what you're saying?
Sure. I think the president, in his statement, said something interesting. He said, I'll sign a bill if it's small enough. He'd love, on behalf of Vice President Gore, to get the Republicans to come in and agree to a negotiation to sign it, to get some kind of a tax cut that was small enough that it really kept, it really didn't take too much money out of Washington, but it allowed him and the Vice President to neutralize the tax issue for use in 2000. I don't think the Republicans are going to fall for that.
Just one quick thing, Jim. It's the only arrow, sadly, left in the quiver of conservatives. I mean, the crime is gone as an issue. Cold War is gone. This is it, and it doesn't sell. It didn't sell in 1999. Americans, the economy is good. They have money in their pockets, and the lure and the appeal of a tax cut was not there. The Republicans found it when they went home. Every poll has showed American people are not committed to it.
John King on CNN yesterday made that very point, that isn't it unusual for a president of the United States to make a big to-do with a ceremony at the White House about vetoing a bill that would cut everybody's taxes?
Yeah, but he didn't say I won't sign one.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to be positioned as being completely against tax cuts, and neither does Al Gore. Now, it would be a mistake for Republicans in 2000 to say tax cuts is the only issue we're going to run on. But as a arrow in the quiver, it's still a lot more powerful than Mark thinks.
We'll see. I mean, it just, I'll tell you, that dog did not hunt. That dog food was not eaten in 1999. Perhaps in 2000. I think if the economy went south, and there was unemployment went up and there was inflation, I think there would be an appeal, a popular appeal for a tax cut.
Okay. The Pat Buchanan story, people are screaming at him and he's screaming back, and it's going back and forth. What's going on, Paul?
Well, I think that as he's become a reform candidate, he's becoming taken more seriously, and he's had this book out where he was hoping, a new book where he's hoping to make a statement about American foreign policy. And instead, he's got himself wrapped up in a debate about what he thought about World War II and whether or not Hitler was a real threat if he had been able to consolidate Europe. Pat Buchanan argues no, he was more worried about Russia, so Europe and England and France really shouldn't have attacked. Well, there are some settled issues in American politics, and World War II is one of them. And I don't think that as a presidential candidate he really wanted to bring that up, and he's finding himself very much on the defensive, and I think increasingly marginalizing himself as a major figure in the Republican Party, certainly.
And just in the last couple of days, John McCain came out with a strong statement criticizing him, and then Elizabeth Dole did, and then today Forbes's campaign manager did, which is at the early part of this controversy, Republicans were saying, "Oh, don't go, Pat." Now they're saying, "Goodbye, Pat." That's a big reversal, is it not?
Well, yeah, I think, Jim, there's a couple things at work here. That first of all, Pat Buchanan, who I think is a very smart guy and a very able guy, shot himself in the foot. This is a self-inflicted, self-indulgent controversy he's created. I mean, you do not introduce hypothetical, complex, historical arguments in the heat of a political campaign, especially on a subject where you've been vulnerable in the past to charges of anti-Semitism. That's where Pat Buchanan did not need to be. I mean, he hurt himself and his followers by doing that. That's the first thing. But once that blood was in the water, you'll see Forbes and McCain.
McCain was first.
McCain was first, and Mrs. Dole. You'll see a whole parade of them, and conservative columnists and editorial pages attacking Pat. Why? Because Pat, as the Reform candidate, they want to disable him so the Reform Party doesn't take him.
Well,
okay, and they say Pat takes, for every 3 votes Pat takes, 2 of them come right out of the Republicans, and that's a concern.
Do you think it's that cynical?
No, I don't. I was going to say there may actually be some, principled divisions here. I think what's interesting is Pat is waving the red flag, and he's saying, charge conservatives to a new movement. And conservatives are saying, activists and journalists, sorry, Pat, you're in no way a conservative anymore. I mean, here's a man who savages Republicans for not showing enough fealty to social issues, and he's willing to join a party, the Reform Party, which doesn't care a lick about social issues. He's increasingly statist in his free market, abandoning free markets, especially on trade. And on foreign policy, an element of conservatism has been a muscular foreign policy that's willing to intervene abroad, and he's repudiating that. So in a sense, he's really not a conservative anymore.
Speaking of cynicism, Orville Swindell, who was a POW,
right,
and who helped found the Reform Party with Ross Perot, made a statement today. He said, "There's a possibility this has all been stirred up by Pat to get all of the publicity. When you're not in the spotlight, you're bleeding to death," end quote. And he meaning that Buchanan as a Republican was doing very poorly, and only chance he had was to run as a Reform candidate.
Oh, I don't think there's any question that Pat was not doing nearly as well as he did. 1992 was the only challenge. He was the conservative alternative to George Bush, the president. In 1996, he was the leader and the carrier of the conservative banner. He beat Bob Dole, the establishment candidate, in the New Hampshire primary. And at that point, the establishment of the party trained its guns on Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan self-inflicted wounds, no question about it. Was this an opportunity for them to jump on Pat? Absolutely. Did he give him the gun and practically hold it out there? Yes, he did. But make no mistake about it, these same folks who are saying Pat's not a good fit with the Reform Party are saying, what about Jesse Ventura? Isn't he something? Jesse Ventura is for legalization of for prostitution, legalization of marijuana. Nobody's talking about this being a fit anywhere. Nobody's talking about Donald Trump and his position on national American nationalism or economic nationalism. It's kind of a double standard at work, it strikes me.
That's an unusual thing in politics, isn't it?
Well, you've got $13 million that because of our campaign finance laws, somebody's going to get. So if you're a Republican, who would you rather have it be? Donald Trump, who people really won't take too seriously, or Pat Buchanan, who might get up there and savage your candidate?
You're not suggesting, are you, Mark, that Pat Buchanan would care a lick about the Reform Party if it didn't have $13 million?
Not at all. Not at all. I'd also say that with George W. Bush and Steve Forbes having basically unlimited funds, unlimited funds, it changes the whole dynamic of the nominating process. I mean, Bob Dole could not compete under this nominating arrangement when you've got two candidates with that kind of money who are not held to the same spending. They can go in and spend $10 to $12 million in Iowa, New Hampshire. That changes the dynamic. Just Buchanan is interested in the Reform Party because it is $13 million, because it is a chance for him to get his ideas out and probably be shot down as loony as well. But make no mistake about this, Jim. If, in fact, it looks like Pat Buchanan's going to get that nomination, and Paul's right, Donald Trump is, a landlord from New York who's a casino owner, is not going to get 5%. Jesse Ventura wants to run in 2004. In order to do so, he has to get 5% this time. He will get into the race himself.
You see it that way,
don't you agree? I do. The problem, though, the Reform Party isn't a political party. It's a Halloween party. I mean, you've got Ross Perot, who comes from, in and out of touch with reality. You've got Lenora Fulani, who's an important figure. She thought Mike Dukakis was some kind of white supremacist. I mean, and Pat Buchanan is going to have lunch with her to sit down and talk about whether or not she doesn't agree with anything he does, except they all agree they need to get 5% of the vote with that $13 million.
But back to a point you made a while ago, both of you made. Is this flap about Pat Buchanan going to make him too much for the Reform Party?
I don't know, because it is such an amalgam of disparate voices. It's hard to tell that there's much of a Reform Party there. So if he gets enough money from Ross Perot, who's his big ally now.
Yeah, Perot, there was a report today that Perot is putting out signals, yeah, I want you, Pat.
He may be able to buy, in essence, the nomination with enough ballots and internet votes, because the process is not like a normal convention. So he may be able to win the nomination anyway.
I think Pat is on the edge, the cusp of becoming radioactive politically, and that would do him in for winning the Reform Party or any other party's nomination.
All right, we'll see what happens. Thank you both. Finally tonight, a story about India. More than 600 million Indians have been voting this month for a new national government. The results will be announced in October. Whatever the outcome, there have been some big changes at the local level. Fred DeSam Lazaro of public station KTCA, Minneapolis-St. Paul, reports on India's efforts to give more political power to the poor and to the women.
In the North Indian village of Kanra, the slow, arduous way of life has not changed for centuries, it seems, for people like Ramwati. In India's rigidly laddered rural society, Ramwati sits on the bottom rung, a caste of cleaners whose job is to sweep and pick up garbage in homes where they aren't even allowed indoors. However, 2 years ago, Ramwati, a woman of few words and no formal education, was elected president of the village council, essentially the mayor. A group of people came to me and asked me to run, she says, so I did. Ramwati's election is the result of a controversial 1993 amendment to India's constitution. It brought affirmative action or reservations to local government at two levels, caste and sex. The act mandates that on a rotating basis, 1/3 of India's 500,000 villages must be led by women, a set percentage of them from lower castes. Throughout the subcontinent, politics have been a male and upper caste domain. Village councils set priorities like roads, schools, and sanitation. Council presidents are supposed to then work with regional bureaucracies to obtain the grants to fund them.
We should do all the development work. We need roads and water pumps. We need new rooms for our school. I have worked to bring grants to the village.
In Kanra, Ramwati talks about the village needs, but few believe she could do much without Mr. Satyadev, an upper caste political ally and veteran of village politics. Dave himself takes credit for bringing water pumps, for creating a road around the village, and in helping keep the village books, which register things like land transactions and tax collections.
This is your signature over here, and this is the thumbprint of the mayor.
However, critics say it is Dave, not Ramwati, who really pulls the strings in the village. Chidda Mal is a high caste farmer and retired village chief himself.
This mayor, she's illiterate.
She's from the weaker sections of society. She cannot be expected to put up any resistance. She's completely in the hands of Mr. Satya Dev. All the projects are for his personal benefit.
No, not at all.
Ramwati insists she's not influenced by Dev, and he denies getting any personal gain. But even though they are allies now, Dev opposes the affirmative action system that put Ramwati in the mayor's job. He likely won't support her in the next election, when the mayoral seat will no longer be reserved for a lower caste woman.
They should educate these people before letting them into positions of power. There should be a minimal level of maybe 10th grade.
Although most political parties in India say they approve some form of set-asides, Vinod Mehta, editor of the news magazine Outlook, says at ground level it's met with resistance.
You're taking on 2,000 years of the way the Indian village has been run, and you're now saying it must change. I think there will be lots of resistance, there will be attempts to sabotage it, but I don't see actual violence, too much actual violence, but I see institutionalized efforts to sabotage it, yes.
But Mehta says there are places where the reforms have taken hold. Kerala, the lush coastal state in the south, is one. At the village hall in Mattattur, the council president is also a low-caste woman, but Mani Kuttappan confidently calls to order this meeting to discuss the problem of alcoholism.
We all have to work together. It's my job as Panchayat president to bring the whole community together on this issue.
Kuttappan took over the job earlier this year, assuming the second half of a 6-year term she won in a power-sharing pact with Vasanta Kumari, an upper caste woman. Kuttappan says her priority is to get information to lower caste communities, officially called scheduled castes.
Scheduled caste people have long been looked down upon, so the government has put in place a number of schemes to help them. But people need to be made aware of these things that can help them.
Both Kuttappan and her upper caste political partner belong to the state's long-ruling Communist Party, which prides itself on bringing nearly 100% literacy to Kerala. Even in this lower caste section of the village, children can be seen with books, catching the day's last light in front of their unelectrified homes. Village President Kuttappan herself has a high school education. However, the state of Kerala has relatively low private investment and high unemployment, a problem especially for women, according to Vasanta Kumari.
Women are treated like second-class citizens because they're not earning. So our objective is to include employment as part of the council plan, to organize self-help groups so women can borrow from each other instead of from moneylenders who they're forced to go to.
Among the small cottage industries that have been developed to help women are basket weaving, using the abundant palm fiber, and chips made from the native jackfruit, which are sold in larger cities in South India. Yet even in relatively progressive Kerala, the playing field is far from even between the sexes. In this chip factory, for instance, men are paid about 25% more than their female workmates, a common practice throughout India.
This is the first time a woman has become village president. This has been ruled by men. This has been dominated by men. So it is not easy to change the situation in 3 years. It can only be changed over a longer period of time.
And even though her lower caste partner says she feels supported as the village president, Vasanta Kumari says it will be a long time before lower caste people gain widespread acceptance.
There need to be reservations for women and also for scheduled castes. Political parties are not interested in fielding women candidates and scheduled castes unless there are reservations. So reservations are a must.
Even though the pace of change may seem slow, many experts predict women like Vasanta Kumari and Mani Kuttappan will grow as a political force on the national scene. Set-asides or reservations, like programs to help women in general, have the support in principle of most political parties and in practice of many non-governmental organizations.
Again, the major stories of this Friday: foreign troops crack down on anti-independence militias in East Timor, arresting a senior leader and searching house to house for others. And back in this country on Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped nearly 40 points, closing the week down a total of 524 points. We'll see you online and again here Monday evening. Have a nice weekend. I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
Modern practices have made American farmers the world's most productive. Who helps put the people who grow the food in touch with those who need it?
And by Solomon Smith Barney.
What will happen in Cuba after Castro? Opportunities abound, and every day we look at them through a microscope. Solomon Smith Barney. Success is earned.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you. Video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.
Funding for local broadcast of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by viewers like you and by the following. Safe Corporation, risk management solutions for a safer and more competitive Oregon. Safe, on the job for Oregon.
Pacific Continental Bank, offering personalized business banking guidance to individuals and companies in Oregon. Pacific Continental.
Behind the dark shadow of the Iron Curtain, they bowed to the will of their nation. Insiders unlocked the secrets hidden by generations of espionage. Hear from the spies, the athletes, and the man who reached for the stars. What secrets will be revealed when you open the Red Files?
On OPB, Monday at 9.
He is a man at war with the 20th century.
The Pope believes that the 20th century is the most tragic of all of mankind's history.
A lonely prophet, shaking his fist at what we've become.
The question is he lost or are we lost for not hearing him?
John Paul II, the Frontline season premiere.
On OPB, Tuesday at 9. Funding for local broadcast of this program has been provided by viewers like you and by the following. Portland French Bakery, a locally owned and operated business committed to supporting our community and the Northwest.